That's awesome. Okay. So welcome. Thank you for joining me live today. It's good to see you, actually.
So good to see you too.
I'm missing my weekly dose of Noelle, so I just go on your Instagram now. So I'm going to introduce Noelle for those of you who don't know her. Noelle, how I've met Noelle was through different events and such like in our community. But Noelle is a registered dietitian. She has a master's of food science in nutrition, and she's a professor at Western. So we've known each other through there as well. I was able to sit on one of her courses this semester, which was amazing. And you own a business, you co-own another business, and then you're a mom of 3 beautiful boys, 2 of which are twins. So yeah, you do a lot of different things. So how are you holding up with everything that's going on right now?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So for those on Instagram, if I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking straight into the Zoom meeting, and vice versa. If I'm looking up, I'm looking into Instagram Live. So trying to do both at once. So thanks for having me, Steph. We are doing well. I'm actually here at the Nourished Beginnings office today. So I did step out of my home for the day, but no one else is kind of around. So it's safe to be here, and we're using precaution. But most of the time, yes, I'm balancing between. There's a lot of feedback. Are you finding that?
I'm getting a lot of feedback too. That's a little better.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what it is, let's see if that works a little better. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Balancing between. So my twins are 8 and my youngest is 5.5. And there's basically just never a dull moment in the day. So Motherhood and Meals is a business that I started, I guess, almost 5 years ago now, with the hopes of just supporting moms as they try to kind of nourish themselves well and their little ones well throughout the stages of pregnancy, postpartum, and then moving all the way up through the years. And then Nourished Beginnings, I co-own with another dietitian, Angela Dodge, and we specialize in helping women during pregnancy and postpartum, and then again, moving through infancy and through the years. Angela's top specialty is working with children with ADHD, but she also does a lot in terms of like infant feeding and that side of things. And I work more with pregnancy, postpartum, and picky or selective eaters.
Yeah. It's awesome what you guys are doing. And honestly, I love following along to your Instagram, because even though I do not have children yet, you have your grocery list for the week that you post. So if someone wanted to eat like your family for the week, they could go to the grocery store, buy what's on the list, and then every day you do live videos of you prepping the meals, making them, and I watch them like, I'm gonna make that. Like, I'm taking your grocery list, but just taking a quarter of it and buying that, because obviously there's just me. But it's amazing. And then you have a son who's lactose intolerant, correct?
He actually can't have casein.
Okay.
So it's one step further than just lactose intolerant. It's a little unique in that he's never been diagnosed with a true allergy. In fact, when we did allergy testing, both the whey and the casein came back as technically not an allergy. But the pediatric allergist that we met with actually said that there will, in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a name for what we are experiencing with Clay. And the best way that I could describe it to you is just, it's an inflammatory reaction within his airways. He was diagnosed with a reactive airway when he was 4. We stem this back potentially to the fact that he was a preemie and intubated at birth, but sometimes you just don't know. But bottom line is, if he ingests casein, his airways close so much that he develops a croup cough, and he's been hospitalized 6 times well, at first we didn't know the reaction would take place, right? So we were figuring it out. But even afterwards, there have been times when like a trace amount was there. It used to be the same with eggs, and we've been able to add eggs to our baking recently and have it be okay. So perhaps he'd grow out of it, but I'm really not, for the casein too, I'm really not pushing it though, because we have a really good rhythm in place using dairy-free products in our home. I don't worry at all about, his nutrition. And I think even if we aren't seeing the inflammatory reaction in his airways down the road, what if somewhere else in his body is suffering that we can't see?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we can see things right away and sometimes not. So yeah, that's been an interesting adventure for me. He couldn't tolerate casein when he was a baby, when I was breastfeeding him, and it looked like he had grown out of it. And then we later found out he hadn't. So I had to adjust my own diet to casein free when I was nursing him. And his twin brother couldn't handle if I had soy. So casein free and soy free all of a sudden while I was trying to manage preemie twins. So that was interesting, just wearing a mom hat, right? And trying to pull in my dietitian knowledge. But I actually even reached out to a dietitian at that point because I was like, I just need someone who can think clearly right now to walk me through some of this. But I'm so thankful for the experiences I've had on top of education, because I think it helps. I mean, you'd be able to speak to it better, but I think it helps in terms of the classroom at Russia, and then of course with clients as well.
Yeah, I when I sat in on your class, it was so great to hear your stories, because I think even for myself, what I try to do with students is use stories, because then it usually sticks in their head a little bit more, right? Like they have that story, that memory that then they can tie to whatever theory you're teaching them that day. So I think it's super important. And then when I was in your class, you had talked and openly discussed, infertility and how you guys had struggled with that, which I thought was super cool, because a lot of people don't talk about that, first of all. And then there's the nutrition component to that, which you discussed. And then there's also, I was doing my egg donation at the time. So you had done IVF, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm doing this stuff right now. And you were my go-to person with those little conversations we had. Like, I think I'm pretty good with nutrition, with prenatal nutrition, postpartum nutrition, because I'm so immersed in this world. But there were so many things and little tips and tricks and things you'd say in class that I was like, my goodness, this is crazy. Like, it makes sense now that you're saying this, but I did not know that. So I think for the viewers, let's go kind of to almost preconception. And, if people out there right now are struggling with infertility, and right now no clinics are open for IVF, which is really unfortunate, but what can people be doing right now from a nutrition perspective to kind of get them set up for that optimal, get their body set up optimally to lead into something like IVF?
Great question. I do have a blog post that I can send you the link if you have anyone ask for it. It's called something like, I wrote it a long time ago, something like the 9 months before the 9 months, or something like that, or before the 9 months. And it was some of the things that I did in combination with recommendations, but also I have endometriosis. And so there were certain lifestyle behaviors that I became much more strict with, knowing that we were heading into this place of IVF. Things I had always, done to help manage, but got a little more intentional about them. A couple of things, whether someone is dealing with infertility or whether they're just considering becoming pregnant, we have to remember that having enough folic acid in our body prior to conception is really important, because the neural tube closes between day 21 and 28 of pregnancy. And a lot of people don't know that they're pregnant until then. If you've gone through IVF, you're like, the day everything's happening, right?
It's right down to the key, right?
Yeah, and it makes pregnancy feel really long because sooner, right? You already feel like you're pregnant before you're pregnant sometimes. So having enough folic acid is really important. And folate or folic acid, in terms of whether we're talking about food or supplement, the reality is that getting nutrition through food is usually our number one recommendation, but we do know that food sources of folic acid or folate, the words technically aren't interchangeable, but for the purposes of this, we just will use that. They're not quite as absorbable or bioavailable, we would say, like biologically available to the body. So it is recommended that we have a supplement each day, either that has folic acid in it or just a folic acid supplement. And that's recommended for at least 3 months before becoming pregnant. And if someone has been on an oral contraceptive, it's important for them to know that oral contraceptive actually interferes with the absorption of folic acid. And so that's one of a few recommendations that it is really great to be able to, be off of it for a little bit.
And that was actually the one thing you said to me, because I came up to you and I was like, I'm donating my eggs. Are there any supplements you think I should be taking? And I'm like, I take a multivitamin, I take a probiotic, I take fish oils, vitamin D, vitamin C. And then you're like, are you taking folic acid? And I was like, no, but that's the number one like when you should be taking. But then I also found out that I have an MTHFR mutation, which, as I did more research, 60% of the population has it. And so this is the one thing I've really tried to educate my prenatal clients on, and just friends in general, that if you're taking the general prenatal vitamin from your regular corner pharmacy, you are not getting folate or folic acid in the required amounts, right? Yeah. So I think that's really important to educate people, because 60% of people have the same genetic mutation I do. We don't absorb it unless it's in that, unless it is already bioavailable. So yeah, definitely important. Are there other things that people should be thinking about, even, you know, like leading right into conception?
Yeah, a couple of things. Someone just said that it's hard to hear us because of the echo. So I'm going to turn my computer down a little bit. Okay. I don't know if you want to do the same. I was just thinking we probably should have worn headphones. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either. That's probably better.
So hopefully if we turn our volumes down just a touch, it'll help. A couple other things to think about. One is omega-3 fatty acids. So we know that all through pregnancy, and then if a mom chooses to breastfeed.
No, I'm getting the feedback there. Hang on, I'm going to turn Instagram down a bit, and I'll turn my computer up a bit.
Perfect. That it makes a significant difference, especially the DHA form of omega-3 fatty acids. It makes a significant difference in terms of brain growth and development and eye growth and development in the baby. And so we really want mom to, right from, you know, day one, be used to getting enough omega-3 in her diet each day, because that way it helps in terms of reducing any inflammatory responses and that kind of thing in her own body. It helps in terms of mental health, which we know is so important all the time, but especially during pregnancy and potentially postpartum as well. And then, of course, it will help with the baby's growth and development. So I'm always thinking, when I think about prenatal and postpartum, I'm always trying to find that really great balance between, you know, care for mom and care for baby, nutrition for mom and nutrition for baby. Yeah. And we used to think like, you know, baby will take whatever they need, like calcium, for example. Baby will take whatever they need. Mom's bones will break down to release calcium for what babies need. And that is true to a certain point, but we also have survival mechanism within our body, right? And you also can't pull, you know, water from a stone. So mom has to have some iron in her body. Mom has to have a realistic amount of, you know, calcium, or she's in huge risk of osteoporosis later in life, or huge risk of anemia after birth. So just making sure that some of those core nutrients are there, thinking about both mom's health during pregnancy and beyond, and baby's health during pregnancy and beyond.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned two right there, calcium and iron.
Yeah. Now, iron, you heard me talk about almost every class.
And you know what? It's honestly the one where I press it as well, because you lose a lot of blood during labor and delivery. So your iron stores are depleted. I know even when I've donated blood, my workouts are not the same for a month. Like I feel it. And I'm a meat eater. I buy my red meat from the local butcher. I cook in a cast iron frying pan. I am trying to get my iron, but even still, like you can't ignore that difference. But then even with iron, there's certain vitamins and minerals that we want to pair together, and then there's some that actually impede the absorption of others. So why don't you discuss that quickly, because not everyone knows this. And again, if you're getting like the generic prenatal vitamin, you're getting all these in one shot. So that means you might not be actually absorbing what you think you're absorbing.
Absolutely. So there's two types of iron. There's heme iron and non-heme iron. And heme iron is technically more absorbable. Now, we still only absorb a small percentage of what we actually consume. But heme iron is generally from animal-based sources. And then non-heme iron is from plant-based sources. And it is not as what we call bioavailable. So similar to what we talked about with folic acid, our body just doesn't absorb it as easily. And as much as calcium is an incredibly important nutrient, it's a little bit of a bully when it comes to iron and other minerals such as zinc, for example. And if we eat them within 2 hours of one another, say, you know, calcium in a milk product and iron in dried fruit. Okay, you have those together as a snack and the calcium takes over. And so we don't absorb the iron. So ideally we want to separate those out. So if I have a woman or a little one, a child that I'm working with that is showing signs of iron deficiency, then I'll say, okay, well, what if we think about, your meal times as iron rich and your snack times as calcium rich, for example. So just trying to get both of those nutrients in without sacrificing the other. But vitamin C, on the other hand, actually increases iron absorption. And so if we were thinking about like a dried apricot, the beauty is that there's vitamin C right in there with the iron. Or if you're having a spinach salad and you add strawberries to it, something where you're combining a source of that less absorbable iron with a source of vitamin C to just heighten the absorption.
Awesome. And on that note, so talking about calcium, talking about iron and vitamin C and D, so nature has it figured out, like the whole egg is better than just having the egg whites, for nutrient absorption, things like that. What are some kind of like quick and easy ways, especially during pregnancy, that women can kind of use as like a go-to to know that they're getting all of the vitamins and the minerals that they need to, or as much as they can from food, and then the rest they can kind of top up in their supplements?
So one of the things that really, really helps is, it sounds so simplistic. And as soon as I say something simple, I think, oh, that sounds so boring. But the truth is that if we really think about the optimal way to nourish ourselves, it is quite simple. Like, we don't really need all the fads, right? So the New Canada's Food Guide has an awesome visual for us to say, half of our plate as brightly colored vegetables and fruit, quarter starch and quarter protein sources. And sometimes the protein and the starch overlap, right? Something like a quinoa or a chickpea pasta or something along those lines. But if we are trying every time we eat, whether it's a plate or a bowl or a glass container, that in a ratio, half of it is brightly colored vegetables and fruit, a quarter is a protein, a quarter is a grain. It doesn't really matter how big, it's more a ratio. That really helps meet our needs. The biggest struggle, I think, for this during pregnancy is how we feel, because not everyone, but most women during pregnancy, especially for the first 12 to 15 weeks, feel really, really exhausted because the blood volume is increasing, right? And so much is going on. You are literally growing another human inside of you at exponential rate. Okay. And the other thing is the nausea, right? That comes along with so much of that. And so it's very easy to sit here and be like, cover half your plate with spinach and mandarin oranges. And then you're like I couldn't handle spinach for half of both my pregnancies. So that's where it becomes more, we want to, come up with ways to be more creative. So things like, pasta sauces that you can add more vegetables to, smoothies, even just every little bit. If you feel like a lot of times, things like muffins, something more carb rich can be a little more palatable. So could you shred some zucchini or carrots in there? And yeah, it doesn't come out to that perfect ratio of half, but you're adding nutrient density. It's the same with kids. Anytime that we can add one little thing, we want to give credit that the little things can over time become big things. Mm-hmm. And then the challenge postpartum is time, right? So you're feeling a little bit better, but there is so little time to do food prep. And so again, it comes to those efficiencies of how we can blend more vegetables into things that we're eating quick and easy, or what can we make ahead of time and keep in the fridge and freezer. Throughout all aspects of life, I think cooking once and eating 2 or 3 times is useful. It doesn't matter if you're really, really, busy and not pregnant yet. It doesn't matter if you're exhausted during pregnancy, if you're during postpartum and you're technically home on mat leave. It's crazy busy when you start to go back to work. There's just so many times in life where it has its own level of busyness. Mm-hmm. And so, making that one recipe, probably from following me on Instagram, one of my favorites is bruschetta chicken. Yeah. And anytime I make it, we have at least 2 more meals with it. Sometimes it's pizza, sometimes it's tacos, sometimes it's salad or pasta or quinoa, whatever it might be. I make a large amount so we can continue to eat it over time. And doing that 2 or 3 times a week, it makes the week of meal planning seem very, very easy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think I was touching on this point before, but I love the fact that, your son's allergic to casein, but all your meals are identical. You have your regular, and then you have the dairy-free version for everything. So people think, if I have a kid with allergies, it's so hard, but really it can be a little bit easier if you plan ahead, right? Whenever possible.
100%. Yeah. And it's often just little tweaks, right? Like if I'm making, a lasagna, if I want to make a regular lasagna and a dairy-free one, I get all the ingredients out. And then on one side I have my, my cottage cheese and my Parmesan and my mozzarella. And on the other side, I have my soft tofu and my dairy-free cheeses. And then I put all the other ingredients in the same between the two pans. I just put the dairy-free option in on one side and the regular dairy on the other. So again, cook once and then we can have it over time. Mac and cheese, same thing. We're making tacos. We just have 2 cheeses out, and then we have a coconut milk yogurt, and we have sour cream, and people want to add those. So it's really just, yes, one meal for all, just making those little tweaks. And sometimes I'm asked, why don't you have your whole family eat dairy free? And there are a few reasons, and they're just personal reasons. It doesn't mean they have to apply to everyone. One of the things for us is it's very expensive to buy dairy free products. And since my other 2 children can have regular dairy, that is one of the reasons. And the other reason is that dairy free products aren't always as nutrient dense. And so I know that there is more protein and calcium and some of the other things available in like a regular cheese, for example. And so I am going to choose to do that. And then for Clay, if he has like a grilled cheese sandwich, we use dairy-free cheese, and then I put hemp hearts in there to up his protein. And the others are welcome to have hemp hearts too. It's not that they can't. It's just the way that we've chosen to do things for our family. But if a family chooses to do 100% dairy-free because one family member is, or because they're vegan, they can use some of these same tips.
Awesome. What kind of going one time back to pregnancy, because big thing we talk about in the lab when we're working with our prenatal participants is you're not eating for 2, you're eating twice as healthy. However, people want to know, what is that number of extra calories? And granted, when you're in the first trimester, you're sick, you're like, whatever goes down at this point. But from a caloric perspective, what should women be thinking about at each trimester as far as additional calories?
Great question. So in first trimester, one of the things that we want to think about is, although there is typically a little bit of weight gain, anywhere from 3 to 8 pounds, although I don't love using numbers, but I know it's nice to know numbers, but we just have to be careful with them, that they're guidelines, not rules. So we do see weight gain. However, that weight gain doesn't really come from extra calories. We see it in the changes of the body. But one of the things to remember is that we want sufficient calories at that time. So the recommendation is basically to figure out your estimated energy requirements. I love just the current EER calculation that's under the DRI. So figure that out for your current body weight, like your pre-pregnancy body weight basically, and ensure that you're getting those calories in. That's a good base point. For some people, they may be hungrier than that. And I would never encourage someone who is in early pregnancy to restrict. Other people may feel super nauseous, and trying to get that many calories in a day may cause them to be more sick. So we always have to individualize, and we use guidelines as a starting point. So that's a starting point. Now, some literature would just say, you don't need to eat any different, you just keep eating the way you were. But some people are undernourishing prior to pregnancy. And so I like to really start with that true number as a guideline, as opposed to just saying, keep eating the way you were. I also highly recommend at least 6, if not 9, eating or nourishment opportunities during the day, especially in first trimester. And that's because both morning sickness and reflux are less likely to occur if you're having several small meals throughout the day. And both morning sickness and reflux are very common throughout pregnancy. So that is one thing to think about. In terms of second and third trimester, we do have exact numbers, but I'm going to give you ranges instead because I just prefer that. So typically in second trimester, we recommend anywhere from 350 to 400 extra calories per day. And it's not recommended that this come from like one extra, just random selection of food. We're really looking to add a little bit more from, we don't say food groups anymore because we don't really have food groups. We more have these nourishment groups, right? So a little bit more to your plate in all of those areas of vegetables and fruit, of grain, of protein. But I often find one of the biggest things that we need to look at is how we can add more healthy fats. because that's often the first thing that's lacking. So can you add some walnuts, almonds, pumpkin seeds, a little extra oil to your salad, sliced avocado, just making sure that that is a strong priority, because those omega-3 fatty acids matter so much. Hemp hearts or chia seeds or ground flaxseed, things like that. And then in fourth trimester, it goes up just a little bit more. It's right around 450 calories extra in a day. We also do have weight gain guidelines. And one of the real reasons for that is so that we will notice if something obscure is happening. If you gain a lot of weight in a week or two, that's a sign there's edema there. And if there's potentially edema, and if there's potentially edema, there's a potentially a risk of preeclampsia. So when we, see whether it be a midwife or an OBGYN or a family practice physician taking weights, it's not meant to be like an obsession of, oh, are you gaining too little or too much? It's more, do we need to watch for risk factors here?
Yeah.
Right. And often if it's a lot of weight at once, it's not because they've had Dairy Queen 3 times that week. It's because there's water. Right. And so we have to be aware of that and stay on top of what could be a potential risk to both mom and baby.
Yeah, and we track weight in our lab as well, but we show an illustration of like your trajectory for weight gain should follow this curve and stay somewhere in this gray area, right? Like
Yes.
It's not a hard yes or no, but you'll have women come in and they'll have a peak, but then you'll find out, on the weekend they ate some really salty food or something, they were retaining water. So yeah, definitely people forget that weight is and can be very important from a chronic disease perspective, and just thinking about, making sure that they are they're gaining weight appropriately, or if they're losing weight, that becomes problematic as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's fast forward a little bit into postpartum and those initial, let's say 8 weeks postpartum. What should women are going to be sleep deprived, they're going to have a baby, they're going to struggle with breastfeeding, maybe, or lactation, all these things. So prepping beforehand is key, but then what can women do during the postpartum period? And what should they be eating? What does that nutrition component look like? How does it change?
Okay, so I'm going to answer your nutrition question, but there's one thing I want to say that it's really important. I don't want to forget to say it. People ask you what they can do, and I recommend one of two things. Ask for meals to be delivered to you, or ask them to get you some fresh fruits and vegetables. Because you get a lot of casseroles and muffins, when in reality you'd love to have a banana or an apple.
Yeah.
So I would highly recommend that new moms, advocate for themselves and their nutrition. And when someone asks what they can do, don't be afraid to be like, could you go to the grocery store? I'd love to make some salads and I can't, right? Or could you cut up some melon for me, right? Like little things like that is huge. So in terms of nutrition, continuing down some of those same nutrients that we talked about before, in terms of omega-3, in terms of iron, you may lose a lot of blood, during delivery. Well, you do lose a lot of blood during delivery. For some, it's excessive. But we want to make sure that we're building those nutrients back up so that you can, if you are breastfeeding, for one thing, the omega-3 makes a difference for baby. But for iron, it's just building your stores back up for energy. You will be tired no matter what, but you will be more tired if you can't build those iron stores back up within yourself through food and supplement. In terms of prepping ahead of time, it's great. I recommend the moms that I'm working with, as they approach into third trimester, that every time that they make a food that could be frozen, that they try to make that double batch and freeze, little bits. And that's a great practical tip. But in terms of day in, day out, whether mom is breastfeeding or whether mom is formula feeding or a combination of the two, I recommend that she tries to eat every time baby eats, because it's this reminder, right? Of like, oh, right, my body needs nourishment too. And hydration and all the things. And I think sometimes when we have moms who are formula feeding, they think, oh, well, I'm not breastfeeding, I don't need as much nutrition. You just gave birth to a human. So whether you are breastfeeding or not, you need that adequate nutrition regularly throughout the day to then build your body and your strength and your energy back up. So having things readily available in the freezer, that's one of the reasons we recommend that. But quick grabs that can just be in the fridge is taking a quick and easy food like an apple, for example, cut it up, take, the 2 minutes, cut it up and put a little bit of Greek yogurt or peanut butter or something like that on the plate, and then go ahead and, eat it and dip it. And it's not completely, hands-free, obviously, but it is quick and easy. That is a great snack to be able to have while baby is feeding if mom feels like she needs to do the two at once. If possible, it's nice to be able to eat either just before or just after baby has fed and feel like you have that time to yourself. Things like toast, quick and easy, do not feel negative about those. I so often would grab a couple pieces of toast with peanut butter and hemp hearts on them because it was super quick and easy for me to grab, and it's calorically dense, it's nutrient dense, it's a really great option. So I think one of the big things is not getting caught up in like, what should I or shouldn't I be eating? It's more just, you should eat. And, sometimes it'll be more nutrient dense and sometimes it'll be really on the go. Another thing that worked really well for me was to have hard-boiled eggs available. When I was breastfeeding the twins, Clay didn't tolerate me having eggs very well, so I didn't do it so much then. But when I was breastfeeding my third, I ate a lot of hard-boiled eggs because it was just, a quick and easy grab on the go. Anything that you can have ready in the fridge is a good thing. I also would recommend prepping food as much as possible while the baby is sleeping if you're not sleeping during that time. So it's totally unrealistic. If you have a baby that cluster feeds from like 5 to 7 and you have toddlers or older children or whatever that you need to feed as well, like you can't prep food and cluster feed that baby. So you may need to prep at 3 in the afternoon, and then maybe the dinner just gets reheated, at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So doing things to just make it work and having a lot of grace with ourselves is so important during this time. And no one is looking for perfection. It's so easy to get caught up in mom guilt throughout from moment one. And it's so important for us to remember that like we're doing our best with the resources of time, energy, and money available to us.
Yeah. And I always say like it's just that oxygen mask analogy, right?
100%.
Like you have to look after yourself first.
Yes.
You can't pour from an empty cup. So, whatever you need to do to make sure you're getting what you need so that your baby gets it or that your body gets it so you can better, be there to help support your infant. Like it's all very important. I really love though that you said, people can leave the healthy meals at the door. I had a friend who actually said that, like I went to the door and there was a sign that please drop off healthy snacks and meals and we'll let you know when we're ready to have you meet the baby. And I was like, that's great, because then, if you come, it makes you rethink, what does this family need at this moment? They need a little bit of time to themselves, and then they need some, good, healthy, nutritious food because they're not going to go to the house to get it. So I think that's great.
And it's, it's great when people want to come and meet and hold a baby, but that's really not what a new family needs.
Yeah.
They need, help on the nourishment side, and they need time. And because we had preemies, we had the opportunity for that. When they came home from the hospital, we actually couldn't have much contact with the outside world for a long time. But under normal conditions here in Canada, that's not the case. There are some areas of the world where mom and baby are alone for a period of time, and it's really ideal for both parties. But anytime someone can come and help with the other aspects of life, it's really useful. And I think too, a mom can use the nourishment that she is taking in the best way when she's not servicing everyone else's schedule and needs, right? You only have so much energy from that nourishment you take in. You're giving a lot of it over to your baby.
Yeah. And then I just thought it's funny because, basically the first 4 weeks of a new mom's life are in quarantine, just like we all are right now, right? Yeah. Like you're not leaving the house, no one's coming over. It's just like you're in quarantine. So this is good practice, right? For all those pregnant women out there right now, this is what your first 4 weeks are
yes.
like.
And you are not bored.
Yeah,
you are very busy.
Now, when women say want to maybe be active again, moving forward postpartum, because that's the women I tend to work with, what kind of considerations for their nutrition do you want? Because I've been fortunate that we always do nutrition talks. I bring dietitians in, holistic nutritionists to work, talk to my moms. But I say, when you're exercising, you're going to put yourself at an energy deficit. And a lot of women get really hung up on, I need to lose the baby weight. But there's also that risk of losing your milk supply.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think that should be something that we should talk about now, because there's a fine line there. So if you want to kind of talk about what you do maybe with women who are more active to ensure that they're meeting their requirements.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I do recommend is remembering that whether you've given birth through C-section or vaginally, your body has gone through trauma. And I'm sure you talk to your, moms about this too, that it's great to start to move your body, but in terms of moving forward with like true, more hardcore physical fitness, every body is different. And you can't just have a guideline on a piece of paper as to when you're ready for that. So that's one thing to consider. Another is the nutrition piece, and another is the hydration. So when we're looking at nourishing our body postpartum, we can look at the micronutrient piece, which is some of the vitamins and minerals and that kind of thing that I just talked about. But in terms of overall energy intake, if we are breastfeeding, we have to think about the fact that we need enough for our body, and then we need enough for baby as well. And in terms of breast milk, the quality of the breast milk will be there either way. The only thing that is really altered in terms of quality is the essential fatty acids. So the more that we have of those, the more baby receives through the breast milk. What is potentially sacrificed though is quantity. And if we don't have enough calories in for the energy that we're putting out, the amount of breast milk that a mom makes can potentially be sacrificed. The same is true if mom does not have enough rest or if mom does not have enough hydration. So typically a mom will produce around 750 mils of breast milk per day. And that will be sacrificed if there's not enough, liquid going into her body, obviously, right? Or enough nutrition. And so making sure that, let's say you start to, walk half an hour a day, put an extra snack in and put an extra cup or two of water in. If you're moving forward with starting to run 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers, then you need quite a bit more nutrition, because ultimately you are responsible. If you're breastfeeding, you're responsible for feeding this child. And so we want to make sure that there's enough there. And if there's not enough, then you have to think about how you can, supplement accordingly. So the first step is nourishing your body with enough hydration, enough calories. Something that I noticed with my kids too, and I have looked a little bit for an explanation of it, and it looks like it's something to do with the potential of lactic acid buildup, but I don't have like the full science answer to it. But I often found that if I breastfed within about 30 to 45 minutes after coming in from a vigorous workout, my kids had pretty intense foamy spit up. And so I should have a better answer. I don't. This isn't from a dietitian standpoint. It's more from anecdotal, just what I experienced. So I often do tell moms that if this happens, from the little bit of research that I did, or what I did a lot of research, from the little bit I found, it had something to do with the fact that there can be a greater amount of kind of lactic acid buildup, and that can sometimes be hard on some babies. But maybe you know more in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, the literature I've read on that suggests that it doesn't change the composition of breast milk. It doesn't change the taste. So that's really interesting. So yeah,
and it happened with all 3 of mine. Yeah. And I would try, I'd try again. I think, it must have just been a fluke. I'd try again. And I'd always regret it because they would spit up way more than usual. And yeah, it was foamy. So I eventually got to a place where I was like, well, we'll just time it so that I'm active and you're not ready to eat when I get back.
Maybe it's like the difference between the 2% out of the bag and like the milkshake being like whipped. Like, I have no idea.
I often wondered that. Yeah. Like, who knows, right? And that's the case. Like, sometimes things just do happen that you're like, there's nothing that says this should, but it's the way it is for me. And so you find a solution as a mom. Like, you figure out how to manage, right?
And how might a mom know or be able to recognize that maybe her infant has an allergy or a sensitivity to something that she's eating? What are some signs?
Great question. So a true casein allergy, you may see some spit up with it, but often you'll see little squiggles of blood in baby's stool. And that's easier to see early on when the stool is kind of, softer. So you definitely, as a new mom, look at poo way more than you ever thought you would. So if it's green and frothy, it could be that there's an issue in terms of intake, like of mom's intake. More than likely though, when it's green and frothy, like a army green and frothy, chances are greater actually that baby's getting more fore milk than ideal and not enough hind milk. So at that point, we would recommend, you start with the feed on, the left side, and you might burp and then go to the right. Instead, you'd start on your left, burp, go back to the left. And if baby still wants more, then you can switch to the right. But sometimes when baby's getting too much fore milk, we find that each feed actually is just one breast only. And you go back and forth that way instead of finishing. So that's something to be aware of, is that if the stool looks different, it could be between fore milk and high milk, and it could be more an allergy or an intolerance. Babies often will show signs of like gas or colic if they're not tolerating a food well, and this can come and go a little bit and may not be an actual true allergy. Things like garlic or some stronger spices like curry or basil or oregano, sometimes raw peppers instead of cooked. Every baby's a little bit different, but some of them will react to some things in mom's diet. I mentioned before that, my one twin didn't really handle when I had soy super well. And his younger brother, Rhett, actually was the same way, but both of them outgrew it by like maybe 5 months. And it would just be more spit up than usual. So you notice if things are different. I'm often asked, can I have coffee? Yes, technically you can have a couple 100 milligrams of caffeine a day and it's seen as safe. However, some of it does go through the breast milk. So if you have a baby who's continuously waking up kind of at that REM mark of the 25-minute of their nap, or they're restless, or they're having a hard time sleeping, it's possible that the caffeine is affecting them. So then it comes a choice, right? Do you want your coffee more, or do you want your baby to sleep more? So, in terms of the can and the can't, a lot of the time it may be, person specific or baby specific.
Okay, awesome. And then
eczema. Sorry, eczema is another potential sign that baby's not tolerating casein or gluten well.
Okay. Now when we're talking infant nutrition, and just from a base perspective, breast milk has everything baby needs, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it really does. And, it's really important to me that a mom never feels judged or less than if she's not able to or chooses not to breastfeed. And formula companies have come a long way over the years to try to match breast milk. They've been adding, they now add many, not all, but many add prebiotics and probiotics and DHA, which is the omega-3 that I was speaking about before. That's important. So there's a lot being done, but there are certain components of breast milk that they cannot replicate. And so we do see that there's certain benefits of breast milk that just, it is what it is. And we don't say this because moms should feel guilty if they can't, but we say it because it's important to educate and understand. So in those first few days, there's what we call liquid gold. There's colostrum, right? And it is yellowy in color because it's so incredibly rich in beta carotene, but it's also rich in many other immune supporting compounds. And then from there we move to transition milk and then mature milk when that full milk comes in. And like I said, there's components in there that make a difference in brain growth and development, that make a difference in immunity lifelong. We also see that there's a connection between babies being able to kind of stop and start when they want to, as opposed to the bottle where some babies will just continue to consume the bottle because there's a visibility to them that there's an endpoint, like, oh, I'll just finish what's there, as opposed to the breast where they can't see whether there's a start or stop. So their hunger and satiety cues, can be used more readily. But like I said, these are important facts to know, but not meant for someone to feel guilty.
Yeah. And for those women, because I've worked with a lot who do not have the ability to breastfeed. So for those women then, what is there a specific brand that you think is a little bit better? Or what are some other options, maybe besides formula? Are there other options for those women?
Well, yes. I mean, they could have donor milk, right? But breast milk and formula are basically the two main options. You will have some physicians say like, oh, around, 4 or 6 months, start with like goat's milk. And that's really scary because the protein is large. Whether we're talking cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep milk, the protein is large and it's hard on the baby's gut. And it can cause bleeding in the GI tract. The other thing is it's very, very rich in calcium without any iron. And we know that babies' iron stores dip around 4 to 6 months post-birth. That's why we start to offer food around 6 months. But if we are offering too much calcium, then we won't see, like, formulas are iron fortified and breast milk has a little bit of iron in there that's very absorbable. You give something like a goat's milk and there's no iron in there. There's huge proteins and there's calcium. So we can cause a lot of damage actually by choosing something along those lines. And it is concerning to me how physicians sometimes do have some recommendations that could potentially be harmful for the baby. And it's not so harmful that you like instantly notice it, right? In terms of the iron necessary for brain growth and development, we can't come back from that. There's a lot of things that we can see catch-up growth with, but we can't in terms of that brain development. So if a baby is anemic from like 6 to 12 months, we may see the consequences of that in grade 4, right? It's not necessarily that we're going to see the consequences of that instantly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because I think it's when you're working, especially with the demographic that we work with often, prenatal, postpartum, it takes a village of healthcare practitioners, right? Like you can't just go to one of us and get the full answer, right? I work with dietitians, we work with massage therapists, chiros, we work with psychologists and therapists because there are so many different aspects to health, especially at this time, let alone that whole life transition of having a baby and what it does to your body and how your body transforms so immensely in such a short period of time that I think it's always really important for people to hear, like your GP is amazing, your OB is amazing.
Oh, 100%. But there's lots of things we couldn't say that they do, right? But it's finding the expert in each field.
Yeah. And especially I think when it comes to infant nutrition, like I say to my women, I'm like, yes, you might spend a little bit more on this brand's prenatal vitamin supplement, but you know that your infant is going to be getting all of the nutrients as opposed to powder. So I find, the cost associated sometimes can scare people. So let's talk about maybe that for a second. Like, what are some ways that women can eat healthy during this time? Or again, whatever, if you have supplement brands that are really good, where can women get food on a budget?
It's a really great question because although I think it's a bit of a myth that healthy eating is more expensive, it does require us to think about finances, right? And one of the things is buying in bulk. Typically, if you buy in bulk, you are going to spend less money. I also recommend that if people do like to have animal protein as part of their diet, that they think about ways to reduce the portion of that and replace some with a plant-based protein. Because beans and lentils are less expensive than, chicken or beef. So can you, take a chili recipe you love and add double the beans and half the meat or chicken, for example. And that will help nutrition-wise in terms of you getting more of the goodness from beans and lentils. But more than that, it helps in terms of the budgeting. Another big thing is to reduce food waste is to notice if your produce is starting to go bad. And so you get to a place where instead of throwing it out, you're putting it into a pasta sauce, or I love to saute spinach because it actually makes the iron more absorbable. And then I freeze it in ice cube trays and I pop it out to put into like a smoothie or a chili or a sauce or whatever it might be, a soup. You can puree. If it's gummy, you find it gummy, you just puree it in and you don't notice the texture anymore and all the goodness is in there. Another thing that I think is really important is just planning ahead, because it's very easy to walk into a grocery store and not necessarily know, like, number one, what's on sale this week, right? Like, go and plan ahead and plan your meals around the vegetables or the meat products or whatever it is that are on sale. And think about how much do you really need to make. Are you trying to make this meal last just tonight, or are you lasting for a few days? What can you do in order to plan ahead to make sure you buy enough, but not too much? And then in terms of like less nutrient dense foods, being picky about which ones you choose. So it's not that we shouldn't have these foods in the house. I mean, all foods fit. It's just if you're spending a lot of money on chips and ice cream, you may feel like eating healthy is expensive because you don't have a lot of money left over for the more nutrient dense food. So, chips one week and ice cream the next, for example, right? Just finding that moderation. I'm just going to plug my phone in 1 second.
Yeah.
I have my computer plugged in. I got to switch to my phone.
Yeah, no worries. I think actually, because we're almost wrapping up on the hour, what we'll do is maybe switch over to Q&A, because I've seen a couple people have questions on Instagram, and I'm going to check on Zoom to see if any of my ladies on Zoom have questions. But I saw one question that just came up, which is a great one. Should we continue to take our prenatal supplement once baby is born?
Oh, great question. You need to continue to top up on nutrients in supplement form. And the nice thing about a prenatal is it does have the extra folic acid. It has the extra iron, which is really, really great. And it also will always have vitamin A in the form of beta carotene instead of retinol. So retinol is not safe during pregnancy. It's not safe for the baby. And so if you think that you may become pregnant again, then it's just a safer kind of route to take.
Okay.
While you're looking for questions too, in case anyone is interested, I do have a course open right now. I know you had mentioned that you wanted me to mention it.
Yeah.
And it's called The Family Table. And it is we start talking about the way we nourish ourselves as moms, and then we move into talking about how to raise happy, healthy eaters and keep the chaos and the fear and everything down around mealtime. So one meal for all and that type of thing. So I did want to offer anyone who's watching today the code. I'd written it down here, that what you and I had talked about, Fitness30 for 30% off. So I can send you the link to it. Yeah. But I wanted anyone who has tuned in to have the opportunity to have that code.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'll make sure that gets posted on the story, and we can even pin it or tag it in the comments right now if you wanted to do that. Sure. That's fine. Ladies on Zoom, any questions for Noelle? We also had the other question through Instagram that I sent you earlier, which was about how do I know if my infant is overeating?
And was the infant that she mentioned, it was like a 1-year-old?
Yeah,
Is that right?
He's closer to the 1-year mark. Yeah.
Yeah. So typically children actually have a really good sense of what they need. In terms of division of responsibility, which I recommend starting as soon as possible in the eating pattern, the parent decides what food is offered, when and where, and the child decides if they will eat it and how much. One of the things that we have to remember, though, is we may have a child going through a growth spurt, or a child that's a big fan of food that eats quite large portions on a regular basis, but then has like a day or two here or there, a meal here or there where they're not that interested. And we have to remember that the division of responsibility applies in both scenarios. So if we're going to let them, continue to have more, there's going to be times where their body just isn't that interested. And so we have to honor both of those and take away our fears and our frustrations on the fact that they're not eating, and recognize the fact that they actually are digging into that intuition quite well. Babies are born knowing to start to breastfeed or start to bottle feed and stop. Right? And so we want to continue to allow for that to happen. Another thing, though, is there's a lot of power in the word available. So if we do have a situation where, you feel like baby's had enough and they're asking for more, like blueberries, for example, right? There are some babies that would eat like a pint or two of blueberries if we let them just keep eating. But you want some blueberries left for tomorrow. It's totally fine to be like, I used a symbol when my babies were younger, like, blueberries all gone, all done, and you can switch to something else. If you can talk to the child, no more blueberries, but I do have some strawberries. Would you like that? Or I have a banana. Would you like that? With like a 1-year-old, it's harder to have that conversation. So in terms of preserving food, especially during the time of like a pandemic, we can only get stuff so often. So in terms of food preservation, it's totally fine to use the word available, not can or can't. But in terms of whether there is more and you're willing to give it, babies technically can, figure that out for themselves. But they may have a huge lunch and be very uninterested in supper. And so it has to work both ways in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about exposure. So how many times should you try to expose your child to a certain food before you accept the fact that they don't like it? Or should you ever accept the fact that they don't?
No, we don't need to accept it. And there's never a particular number. So, you used to hear it said, at least when I was in school, I was taught like, it takes 20 times to expose a child to a food if they know they don't do or don't like it. That's just a random statement, and there's not actual true validity to it. For some kids, it's just 5 or 10 times, and for some, it might be like 110 times. And I recommend that parents remember that exposure isn't necessarily going to be the child putting it into their mouth. It might be that they help to, wash the spinach. That's an exposure. It might be that they help to cut up the cucumber. That's an exposure. It might be that it was just on their plate and they looked at it and they were like, that's still an exposure. Into the mouth, back out of the mouth. I love doing experiments with my kids. So I'll do some cooked carrots at dinner and have some raw and be like, which do you think is going to be crunchier? Which do you think is going to be sweeter? Which do you think that would, be easier to get dip to stay on? Just different things like that. And kids love it. Like, in no way am I telling them you have to eat this. I'm just asking them a question. And kids are inquisitive and they're creative and they want to find out. I'm like, I don't know. So they start to listen, right? And then they play the games themselves, or like, can you fit raspberries on all of your fingers, or would your thumb be too big? I don't know. And then they figure it out. And then before you know it, they're popping them in. So it just takes time. Or I posted on my Instagram feed yesterday, asking kids questions, but within limits. So, if we know we're serving, the example I gave yesterday on Instagram is we were serving onions, and the question was, do you want your onions in your egg sandwich or on the side? So it's not, do you want onions? And it's not, what would you like for lunch? Mm-hmm. So you're still giving kids the opportunity for autonomy and independence and creativity and choice, but within the realm of, this is going to be an onion exposure. It's just awesome. Weird. The exposure
it's happening. That's awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap us up quickly because we have about 30 seconds left. So Noelle, first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on today on Zoom, on Instagram Live. And can you just let everyone out there know what services you're currently offering, how they can get in touch with you? Ready, set, 20 sequence.
Okay, so on Instagram, it's at Nourished_Beginnings or at Motherhood and Meals. You can email me Noelle@motherhoodandmeals.com. And picky eaters, pre and postnatal, and moms in general.
All right, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.